Greetings from the county line. We're back at the Grissom Air Museum this week, a place I like to call home because I did most of my growing up right up the street. My guests again today are retired Air Force Colonel Tim Cahoon and Tom Jennings, the director of the Grissom Air Museum. And just on our little break there, Colonel, you were commenting about how service members often relate to each other, regardless of their branch, through, I don't know, banter.
Yeah, friendly banter. It's out of love that we do that.
But if somebody else, I've noticed, I mean, we can pick on the Marine Corps. I mean, everybody does.
Yeah.
The Marines pick on the Navy. But if somebody who's a civilian picks on any of them, we're going to be the first to jump to their defense.
Oh, yeah.
Marines,
that's
National Guard, Coast Guard, whatever it is. What kind of uniform did you wear before you start opening your mouth?
I agree.
Which is relevant, by the way, during all this political stuff that's going on right now. But I don't want to get into that. So I will get into this.
At the moment.
Those of you who have been longtime viewers will remember that Colonel Cahoon is a return guest. He appeared in some previous podcasts and referred to one generation or another. I can't keep X, Y, and G straight, but he referred to them in less than flattering terms that had to do with, I don't think it was a direct reference, but it kind of made some reference to female genitalia, and my wife, who, since we were in her dining room, she had some say over what our guests could.
I'll probably never be able to go back.
Well, you were censored, at least for that episode, but so we had to come up here to the Grissom Air Museum to get you back, because I enjoy what you have to say most of the time.
Well, I can be less political when I'm talking about aviation. I mean, there doesn't have to be a political component to that necessarily.
Good to know. Well, in our previous episodes, we talked about the legacy of the base and everything the museum and especially our friend Tom Jennings is doing to preserve them. And we talked about some of the aircraft. How many do you have out here?
28.
28 airplanes, and a number of them have actually served on this base and served in Grissom's mission at some point. We talked about the B-47, the bomber that got here in 1959 when SAC first came here. We talked about the EC, and well, at least the KC-135, which Tim has extensive experience with, the tanker. And we talked a lot about the B-58, which I think is the aircraft that made this place, it's the beer that made Milwaukee famous.
Exactly.
But we didn't talk about the KC-97, and you've got one of those out there.
We do have one out there, and it's a very interesting aircraft. It's one of the few that I've ever seen that had both jet engines and propellers on it. And,
why?
Well, as I'm told, they've added the jet engines on it to give it a little more oomph, because of the day, the jets that they were refueling were going faster than what the plane could go, so they needed that extra power to move it along, so the plane that they were refueling wouldn't stall and just drop, if you will.
When was the KC-97 was a tanker, and you've got one out here. It looks a lot like a B-29, a pregnant B-29. Is that what it is?
I think so. I think, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, I think it was also used for other things besides refueling, kind of like cargo.
Interestingly, I was just reviewing the history of this. My son sent me a picture of a RF-101 being refueled by a KC-97, and I was surprised by that, so I was looking at it.
Well, you're very well informed then for this discussion.
Well, I am. I like to think I'm
Tom
very
and I
well
will just drink this excellent bourbon, and you go ahead.
Well, let me. Let's go back to the beginning.
But there you go.
There was experimental air refueling. I think in 1923 there was an airplane called the Question Mark, and I don't know if they were probably, if they weren't biplanes, they were very early monoplanes, and they literally somebody said, hey, we can air refuel. Well, how are we going to do that? And one airplane had like 50-gallon drums and a pump and a hose, and the other guy flew up behind him, grabbed the hose and stuck it in the fuel tank, and they refueled. And they were able to stay up, I'm going to say 24 hours. It might have been longer, actually, but they proved the concept.
Sure.
But it did not seem necessary yet, nor practical, so it just languished. Yep, okay, that's neat. We could do it if we had to do it. So from that point on, all the way through World War II, we never air refueled. We didn't have tankers. While they maybe could have used them, particularly in the Pacific, places like that, they didn't have them. Finally, after World War II, somebody decided it was time that we needed tank. The Cold War was beginning. The nuclear weapons were on board. We envisioned having to fly beyond the range of just the fuel you could carry. So they first took the B-29 and converted those to KB-29s. And then they modified the B-29 to the B-50, bigger engines, bigger tail. And so they had B-50s, but then they had KB-50s. And then, like you said, the KC-97 was actually first the C-97. They needed and wanted very long-range cargo planes. And so some great aero engineer decided we could modify the B-29/B-50 and create that. There were others as well at that time. Golly, I'm trying to think of, there was another really long-range cargo plane. But the C-97 was first, and then somebody's like, we can make it a tanker, and they put a boom on it, and they put the jet engines on it, and that was great, but the jets kept getting faster and faster, and needed to have more and more fuel. The B-52 ultimately is sort of the thing that drove the KC-135's creation.
Okay.
And but in the interim, of course, we had KB-29s, KB-50s, and the KB-50s, the last KB-50, I think, was retired in '65, but they couldn't carry near enough fuel for bombers, for sure. And then the KC-97 could carry more. But heck, like you said, it just can't, a bomber ideally wants to fly, around 300 indicated. You can't get a KC-97 to 300 indicated. So like you were describing during the break, the KC-97 is going to go as fast as it can. The bomber almost has to go as slow as it can. The slower you go, the sloppier the flight controls. It's just not easy. Yeah. Air refueling, at least learning it, is never easy. But you want to hope both airplanes have similar flight characteristics so that you're in the heart of the envelope there. You can, the controls are responsive.
And these two airplanes clearly did, they were night and day. The B-47, which is what it was designed to refuel, was a swept-wing, jet-propelled, basically a big fighter, which was designed to carry these nuclear bombs. And the KC-97 was a hand-me-down from World War II.
Yeah, well,
and they, like a Ford Motor Company engineer, they just kept adding stuff to it, hoping it might work. We'll put a glove compartment in it. Well, bigger engine, dual exhaust, it'll be fine.
The KB-29s and the KB-50s, I guess the KB-50 they probably put a flying boom on it. They invented it, but they were primarily hose and drogue, which is a harder way to refuel, and you can't transfer fuel at the same rate that giant pipe of the flying boom, which
you better explain what that means. Okay. And you just explain.
You come all the way to today. all U.S. Air Force airplanes are refueled by a movable pipe, the boom. And it can pivot up, down, left, right, and extend in and out. And then there is a receptacle on the receiver aircraft. And so the receiver flies up behind the tanker, stops at a predetermined distance. The boom operator then extends that boom, that pipe, into the receptacle, and it locks in there. And then the pilots turn on the fuel pumps and they pump fuel. But it's a big pipe. It can pump a lot of fuel, really, depending upon the type of receiver. Fighters, typically, it's only 1 or 2 pumps. Bombers and C-5s, things like C-17s, you can put 4 pumps.
So these 2 airplanes.
Yes.
Flying up in the sky somewhere, and somebody arranges for them to meet over in airspace.
Yeah.
And somehow this airplane that needs gas is able to pull in behind this tanker and stop.
Every receiver type has a designated optimum air refueling airspeed. So you're up there in the tanker, you're waiting for the receiver. I'm oversimplifying, but if it's an A-10, he's going to air refuel at 210 knots. That's really slow. If it's an F-16, F-15, I'm going to say 325, something like that. But you know that. So you're going to orbit, depending, if that's all you're going to do that day is refuel that specific type of aircraft, you're going to do this orbit, you're going to rendezvous with them, you're going to roll out in front of them, and you're going to slow to that pre-designated speed. And then the receiver will then optimally come into position and stop at that. But he knows what speed you're going to be at, and you know what speed he's going to be at. Then on the, you can do this without talking to anybody. While you're training, you're talking to everybody. The boom operator's talking to the receiver pilot. You're talking to each other while you're rendezvousing. But in combat, you can be given coordinates. Be here at this time, at this altitude. You're going to get this receiver. He finds you, you find him. He pulls up behind you, totally calm out. Boom operator flashes some lights at him. You're clear to contact. You hook up. You know how much gas to give him. You either been told, or you're going to just fuel him up until it stops, and then he's going to disconnect and leave. But there are, first of all, you often non-military aviators think that the boom operator is going to move that boom around and catch that receiver and then keep him there. No. It's flexible because, yes, almost no one can keep it perfectly in the exact right spot. But he's going to set that boom at the proper angle and zero left, right, and there are colored stripes on the boom, red, green, and yellow. And green is where you want to be. You're either too far out or you're too close in, and you'll see yellow. Yellow's on both sides of the green, and then red. And if red's bad, yellow's sort of bad. Green's good.
Yeah.
So you're going to pull up, you're going to stop. That boom's centered, and it's at the proper up and down. You're cleared to contact. The receiver pilot moves in to where that tip of that boom is, I'm going to just say about a foot away. And at that point, if the boom operator needs to move it slightly, he'll do that. He puts it there and extends it. There's knuckles that then lock inside the receptacle. And then a light comes on in the receiver, contact. The boom operator knows it's contact. He tells the pilot, you turn the pumps on to do that.
I'm sure.
But it's the receiver's job to keep his airplane there, not the boom operator's job to keep it there.
Sure.
So you fly, and there's lights on the bottom of the tanker that you can reference. They're not always real good. They're not always real bright, but depending upon you get low, these arrowhead lights, they tell you to go up. If you get too high, they tell you to go down. and then there's a big yellow stripe painted on the bottom of the tanker,
Yeah,
and
we've
you
all
can
seen
tell
that.
if you're left and right. But generally, once you get experienced at it, there's just a view that this is right. This is the right position. I know in the A10 that because the receptacle's in front of you, so you would see the engines on your canopy bow at a certain location. And they just, if they were too low, you're too high. If they're too high on the canopy bow, you know, if you see them go like this, you're too close. If they do this, you're too far away. And you just got where you could, hey, I'm in the right place.
Most of this is all seat of the pants
Oh
flying.
yeah, it's all just eyeball
So
stuff.
modern technology hasn't made this any easier
Well,
for these
no,
two guys, the
not yet.
receiver and the boom operator. And
now-
I'm
and the
assuming the
boom
aircraft
operator-
pilot also has a lot of
yeah.
responsibility here.
Yeah, well, the tanker obviously has to fly very smoothly. You don't want to make it harder on the receiver. And now the boom operator, if you're doing it with comm, he can give corrections. He can tell the pilot, come forward, come aft, come left, come right, things like that to help. But that's really for training. You have to be able to do this comm out. You know, in combat, you can't be blabbing away on the radio so that the bad guys find you out there refueling, because you're extremely vulnerable at that point, and getting your gas is extremely critical to completing the mission, whatever that. And almost every single Air Force airplane can be air refueled, whether it's a C-17 or a C-5 or a B-52 or an A-10. Even the brand new trainer, the T-7 that will replace the T-38, I think it's going to be air refuelable so that they can learn how to do that sooner in their career than waiting until they're in their operational aircraft.
Let me get back to Tom's airplane.
The KC-97, all that was even harder back then. That's for sure.
So how did they do it, Tom? What makes your 97 a unique airplane in Air Force history?
Well, one of the things is a boom operator once told me when they were refueling, if the receiver plane could not slow down enough without stalling, and the KC-97 couldn't go fast enough, they would go what they would call toboggan. They would get to a certain altitude, they would engage, and they would transfer fuel in a nosedive. That way, no one would, stall.
What is a nosedive, Tim, when you're hooked up to another airplane?
Well, that sounds a little dramatic. No.
Okay.
It's a shallow, controlled descent, but it's going to allow you to sustain, even if it's another 5 or 10 knots. And like you were talking about earlier, of course, the tanker's getting lighter as his fuel is going to the receiver. Therefore, the receiver's getting heavier. So it makes it easier in the course of that for both of them. And when you're talking about a bomber, you're talking about thousands of pounds, and we talk about pounds in military aviation, not gallons, but they're 6.5 pounds per gallon for anybody who wants to know on average. So, the tanker might end up 100,000 pounds lighter, and the bomber's 100,000 pounds heavier. So that toboggan maneuver can be very helpful for both. The other thing too is that you may be turning while you're doing this. If depending upon where the bad guys are, the tanker doesn't really want to go there. So he might be just orbiting, like you mentioned in a previous show. So the receiver's back here in a turn, getting his gas. Could just be there's bad weather. So the tanker is turning and the receiver's got to hang on and get his gas while he's doing that, and then they're going around back this way around a thunderstorm. So the more experienced you become, that becomes easier. But and there could be turbulence. We make it look easy, but you have to work very, very hard at this on both ends. The tankers today, typically we refuel with the autopilot on, but we are required to train with the autopilot off. So you have to fly that big airplane with immense precision maybe for a half hour. And because you don't want that guy back here who's depending on you to get disconnected. I mean, it's too important he gets his gas, because if he does, well, then you got to reconnect, and depending upon circumstances, that can be difficult.
Don't your flight controls require constant adjustment as the airplanes take on and lose fuel?
You know, when you are doing autopilot off refueling, you are glued to the ADI and your instruments. And, I mean, you're just constantly, you're flying. I mean, you are in contact. I mean, we watch the Thunderbirds, and they're 1, 2, 3 feet away from each other. Even commonly, we fly like that. But you have to be smooth as a leader. And when you're refueling, you're the leader. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you can't be just like this. Holy cow! You know, you don't want to be the guy who causes that guy to get disconnected. But, I mean, we have procedures for that and emergency procedures for big screw ups, but 99.99% of the time, I mean, you are focused. Even when it's on autopilot, one pilot must keep his hand on the controls and the throttles in the event that the autopilot disconnects for a malfunction.
It's a good safety feature.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
What else you got going up here, Tom, besides this season, besides your
What's
fascinating
next?
airplanes? No, what's going on right now? What's for the rest of this season? I see you've got a big exhibit about Howard County's Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah.
What else?
We've got that. We're going to be gearing up for a golf outing here, September 13th.
Now, you've just
at the
taken
Lotus Park.
up golf recently.
I did.
Are you a good golfer?
Well, let's just say I've taken it up.
Do you like to imbibe while you're on the golf course, or is that something you save for the club later?
Well, no, I understand what comes with playing golf is a drink and a cigar. So
Is that at the
fit right
beginning
in.
or the end?
I don't know why you didn't do this.
During.
It's during. Yes.
Oh,
When's your
okay.
golf outing?
It's September 13th. It's a Friday. Lunch starts at noon. The tournament starts at 1. So if you have any interest, go to our website or call the museum at 765-689-8011, and we can get you the enrollment form and set up a team. You could also be a whole sponsor or one of many other sponsors.
What golf course will you be on, Tom?
We're going to be in Logansport. Logansport Golf Course.
Is that the one down by the river?
Well, the way I play, everyone's near a river. But yeah.
The one that we had the annual meeting at?
Yes, same one at the annual meeting. Yep.
Yeah.
So yes,
So you just had a very successful car show.
we did. It was just busy.
I mean, this is what you have to do in your business, right?
We do.
Because admission prices, this is important.
Yeah.
Who do these airplanes belong to out here?
The airplanes belong to the Navy and the Air Force. We own just 2, but everything else is owned by the Air Force and the Navy. We get no support from the military or the Air Force or the Navy. And
No support from Grissom, despite the fact that you're trying to preserve their legacy.
Correct. So everything we raise through admissions, through events like the car show, the golf outing, J3 event, lights in the air park during December.
And these airplanes, 28 of them,
Yeah,
they're not like statues. They require
it's up to us.
somebody
paint
has to
them.
keep the water out of them,
Yep.
paint them,
Yep.
tend to the insignia, pump
Yep.
the tires up,
Absolutely.
spray the weeds,
Yep.
mow the grass.
Yep.
How you doing on volunteers?
We're light on volunteers. We could always use more help.
How do I become a volunteer, Tom?
Come to our website, www.grissomairmuseum.com, or call the museum, or stop out. We can give you an application to fill out, and we can talk about opportunities. It could be cutting grass, it could be aircraft maintenance. And when I say aircraft maintenance, doing light repairs, trying to mitigate some of the corrosion on the aircraft, replacing the windows or caulking them, just making sure that we can keep the animals out and the water out.
And you have professionals, veterans and other people that have been involved in aircraft maintenance and other fields who can train your volunteers to actually keep these things up to acceptable standards. And by the way, aren't they inspected by these branches of the military that still own them periodically to make sure that you're keeping them up to standards?
They do. They do look into them to make sure that we're not letting them go or get trashed, if you will. So they do check them out. They do make sure that they're not in bad shape, or else it's up to us to go to the expense to take them apart and ship them back.
I remember a few years ago, before I was involved with the museum, in fact, that you lost a B-17, which was a
Did you ever find it?
It's
I didn't know I was supposed to be looking for it, Tim. But
it's at Warner
Shame
Robins.
on you. Shame on me.
And it's fully restored.
so it went to a good home, but the thing was, somebody at what you like to call the mothership at their big museum in Wright-Patterson decided that, Grissom's not really doing what we want them to do with that B-17, so we're going to just take it away from them and move it someplace where they'll do something else with it.
Yeah.
And that could happen to, your pride and joy, your B-58 too, I suppose, or your B-25, which is another very interesting exhibit that you've got out there.
Yep. And because those planes are owned by them, yes, they could, come back to us, Navy or Air Force, and say, we're going to pull this aircraft. On the flip side of that is if they pull it, the expense goes to them.
Well, nonetheless, this museum, which is you were voted the second most popular attraction right in Indiana.
Correct.
2 or 3 years ago.
Yes.
By popular demand, everybody wanted to come here. So this place is important, not just to Miami County and the Tri-County area, but apparently to the tourism in Indiana.
Well,
exactly.
And if we start, so it's up to you and your volunteers and your donors to make sure that these airplanes are properly maintained and taken care of.
Correct. So we need people to help with that, and we need funding. You can adopt a plane, and that adopting a plane goes into, painting, replacing the decals, doing some minor fixes to it, doing any patches or corrosion control. Also patching up some of the open spots, so critters, birds are a big thing they like to get into them. So whatever we can do to keep the animals out, keep the integrity of the aircraft intact is what we need to do. So we need funding and we need people to help with that. Our volunteers can stretch a buck like no other.
Yeah,
as you well know.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Would you welcome corporate sponsors?
We would. We would take corporate sponsors and any individuals that would like to contribute to the museum. We would recognize the fact that they've donated or sponsored, an aircraft, an exhibit, or whatnot. We'll make sure that they get the recognition they deserve.
Do you still have the sponsors' names on the exhibitor signs?
We do. We do have it on there. And at each of the planes, if it Supley's is out there or
Eric Chevrolet, Clifford Signs,
Gold Medal,
Yeah.
Beacon, all those, those signs are out there. And we do, again, like to acknowledge that they've sponsored that aircraft or that exhibit. So, again, getting the recognition that they deserve for doing that for us is important.
And this is unique. This is a unique thing to support.
Exactly.
There's not a lot of other air museums, around. So when those people donate, whether it's a corporation or an individual, they're supporting something very unique to their state and their county.
Supporting veterans.
Yeah, that's true.
This is a win-win.
It's a no-brainer.
It absolutely is.
It is.
Now, in our first episode we did out here, Colonel Cahoon asked you about this exhibit building you wanted to put up around
Correct.
in and around the Hustler.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the price tag on that, and how close are you to getting there?
Well, it's $2.7 million. We're almost halfway there. Fundraising and philanthropy is kind of slowed, but we're keeping at it. We're, still trying to find the corporate donors and those that want to support.
Or wouldn't it be neat if somebody just adopted that? Some corporation adopted that, and
would
you could
be.
put their name right up front on it.
We would.
You would welcome that.
We would welcome that, and again, if done right. And the thing about it is, it's more than just covering the aircraft. There's also an educational factor that goes into it. The exhibits and displays that we have on display inside here would go out there, so we'd start telling those stories out in that building. We would also have educational components go along with that because of the uniqueness of that B-58. We would talk about speed, altitude, and design. It's part of the design. The J-79 engines that are in that aircraft, there's 4 of them. Well, where did they go after the B-58? Well, they went into the F-4, which takes 2 of them. Further lending that, you can, with the right engines, you can fly a brick in the F4.
Yes.
So you take 2 J-79 engines, put it in there, and fly anything. So there's some designs in there that was used in other aircraft down the road, and that's pretty critical.
But I heard you tell somebody, and this impressed me
Okay.
more about than anything else you ever said, was that the airplanes are a big attraction.
Yeah.
That's what brings people in here. They drive down the highway, they see the airplanes, they pull in, they want to look at the airplanes.
Yep.
But all those airplanes really do is let us tell the story.
Exactly.
And it's the story that matters.
Yep.
So, we're out of time, but maybe we can come back and talk later, because...
I was going to ask...
Oh, you got something else?
Well, you also schedule or whatever school tours, is that correct?
School tours and adult tours. So we do all kinds of bus tours and whatnot. And a lot of those tours are done by veterans. We've gotten some great comments. We've also had a couple of articles in the paper talking about the museum and our veterans that do the tours. And people appreciate that because, again, not only can they talk about the aircraft, but they can give a little bit more insight. And they can also talk about their experience with that aircraft or with these aircrafts or whatever their connection
Which is increasingly important in a society that's moved further and further away from...
We need to be
the
reminded of
military
our
that
history,
protects us,
Yep.
yes.
so we're not doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
And from school children and the emphasis on STEM studies, what's that?
Sure.
Science, technical, engineering and mathematics, maybe?
I don't even know what DEI means. So.
Well, I'm talking about STEM, not DEI.
Oh, okay.
I'm just thinking as a great way to introduce kids to those things, because so much of that is required to design and fly airplanes.
Exactly.
That it's for science teachers.
Yes.
You may want to think about bringing school kids here as well. Not just from the historical perspective, but from the motivational, educational perspective.
All right.
Correct. Yep.
We're going to have to go to a commercial. So for 40-some years, this base, the motto was "Peace is our profession." And as we leave you tonight from the Grissom Air Museum, I just want to wish you all peace. God bless you. We'll see you next time.
Yep.